Okay, here we go. This is my first attempt at a little voiceover audio for a video lesson. Chromatic scale. Thought it was interesting that the Latin root means color. You can think of like chromosome and other words that use that same Latin root. Try to connect it back. So think of your chromatic scale as having all of the musical colors. Vocabulary that you're going to need to know in order to access the information in this lesson. Pitch, a specific sound in music. We call them notes and identify them with letters A through G. These are my definitions, by the way, trying to be as simple as possible. An interval is the distance from one pitch to another. Half step is a big one for your chromatic scale. It's the smallest interval in our musical language, also known as a minor second, abbreviated as M2, or semitone. Might be more a semitone, I don't know. It's been a long time since I was in college theory class. That little caret there that I circled, when you see that, like on a scale, it indicates that there is a half step there. And lastly, an octave, the interval created between a note and the next note with the same name. Chromatic scale is all half steps. And a half step is the smallest interval that we deal with. So that means every note on your instrument is part of the chromatic scale. And that's why it's so important to know your chromatic scale. It's a measure of how well you know your instrument. So how many different notes are there? Well, here's where an octave comes into play. An octave can be divided into 12 half steps. So that means that you have 12 notes in every octave, 12 different pitches. It's important to remember that every scale stretches the entire length of your range on your instrument. We often play scales that only cover one octave, but every scale extends above and below that. So my example is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. You get your octave. If you play this over your full range, maybe you can't get up to the next A, but you can stay in that scale, and maybe you can start lower. I just encourage you guys to think of scales beyond the octave. Okay. So there I've labeled the octave from A to A. Now the numbers that I'm putting on the bars here are the half steps, the number of half steps. So that's 12 half steps in an octave. Now this next frame, I label two spots with half step, and that's where you have two of those lower level on the piano. Those would be the white keys. All right, there's two spots on the keyboard where white keys are a half step apart from each other. Otherwise, you're using those black keys, and that's what I'm labeling now. I'm going to label them first coming from the note below. You can see how they fall in between two notes going all the way up. So you have A sharp, above C is C sharp, D sharp, and so on. Now I'm going to come back down as if I'm coming from above. So all of these notes end up with two names. So A moving down becomes A flat, G flat, E flat, D flat. There's B flat at the bottom. So if you're playing a chromatic scale, you can think of sharps or flats. If it's written on a page, it could be written as sharps or flats, and I'm just showing you there that the middle school vibraphone is A-OK, all right? Using my teacher privilege to take a dry erase marker to that thing yesterday. Okay, at the end here, and my camera spot was a little off, but it just says transposing a chromatic scale is a bit overkill because it's every note on your instrument. But I'm just gonna write it out for you, starting on concert B flat, home bass for us, and take it up through the octave. When you end up with a black key, and you can notice in between B and C on this one for concert pitch, you see that little caret, meaning half step. I'm including both the sharp and the flat version of each note, and I slow the video down at the end in case you need to pause it in a spot. If that's your scale, concert pitch instruments that you're figuring out, there it is in order. I apologize for any background noise right now. That's just life teaching at home. Kids were outside earlier. Now one's sleeping in the swing, the other one's playing nicely behind me. But okay, here's E flat instruments, alto and bari sax. B flat instruments, trumpet, clarinet, baritone, TC. You guys are going to start on C. And one last thing I wanted to include here. All of these pairs, F sharp, G flat, G sharp, A flat, A sharp, B flat, C sharp, D flat, D sharp, E flat, and I'm gonna fill them in as if they were the black keys on a piano. Those are called enharmonic equivalence. So that's another important vocab term that goes along with this lesson. Enharmonic equivalent is just the fancy way of saying one pitch with two names. Remember, a sharp raises a note, a flat lowers a note's pitch, and my little diagram here. So I've got two white keys, C and D, and then I've got the black key in between. If I go from the black key, if I go from the C up to that black key, that's a C sharp. If I start at the D and go down, that's a D flat, and that's an example of an enharmonic equivalent.